There was nothing happening in America that had to do with the advancement, the struggle for equality of black people, where Mary McLeod Bethune was not there.
Mary Jane McLeod, the 15th of Sam and Patsy McLeod's 17 children, was born in her family's log cabin near Mayesville, South Carolina, in 1875, 10 years after slavery ended.
Mayesville is sort of a small hamlet. It is in one of the areas of the Cotton Belt of South Carolina. Her family worked for the same family that owned them earlier. She was the first child born out of slavery. That gave her a different outlook on life than all of her brothers and sisters and her parents who knew slavery.
Her parents realized that she was destined for something bigger. And her grandmother, she said, was royal African blood.
Her mother and her grandmother set the tone for her. They inculcated in her the sense of pride, self-knowledge. In order to be a leader, you have to really understand yourself and who you are and where you came from.
She was a person that seemed to want to do something. You know, she wanted to be more than a sharecropper.
There was a school in Mayesville, a school that had several grades, but they all were in one classroom. And the teacher was Miss Emma Wilson. And Miss Emma Wilson saw that Mary had special potential and invited her to come to the school. She had to walk 5 miles there and 5 miles back.
And then she went to Scotia Seminary in Concord, North Carolina, which was the first major boarding school for black girls.
Mary then encountered a world that she didn't know existed. Scotia had an integrated faculty. It was sponsored by the Presbyterian Church. It also introduced her to a middle-class lifestyle. And that's where she begins to get her polish.
And then she went to the Bible school in Chicago, which later became Moody Bible Institute. People from around the world were enrolled in that school. And the city was just alive with immigrants from everywhere.
Her whole biggest dream in life was to be a missionary in Africa. And after studying in seminary, she was told as an African-American woman they wouldn't send her to Africa.
Mary McLeod graduated from Moody Bible Institute in 1894. Denied a missionary position in Africa, she returned to Mayesville and briefly taught at her former elementary school. She then moved to Augusta, Georgia in 1896 and taught at Haynes Normal and Industrial School under the direction of Lucy Craft Laney.
She just fell in love with Lucy Laney and Lucy Laney's approach to education. Lucy Laney was the first woman graduate of Atlanta University. Lucy Laney had a college education, and for a black woman, for white women even at that time, that was unusual. She used the same approach that Atlanta University used. In other words, it was a literary, liberal arts type of education, as opposed to the vocational industrial education that Booker T. Washington and some others had.
After teaching at the Haynes School for 1 year, Mary McLeod moved to Sumter, South Carolina, in 1897 to teach at Kendall Institute. While at Kendall, Mary fell in love with Albertus Bethune, a promising education student at Avery Institute in Charleston. They married in Sumter in 1898, then moved to Savannah, Georgia, where Mary gave birth in 1899 to her only child, Albertus Jr.
She says in one document that I wasn't intending for married life to change what I want to do and my vision of my role. So immediately there was a clash. Albertus, who had actually come from a prominent family in Charleston and had superior education, wanted to go into business. In fact, he sold insurance. They both did for a while in Savannah. And he didn't see himself being Mr. Mary McLeod Bethune.
She was in Palatka, Florida for 5 years. She had a parochial school for 2 years. So she understood fundraising. She understood how to approach people. When she came to Daytona, she knew exactly what she was doing.
She could see that what she wanted to do would be more successful in Daytona Beach, because Daytona Beach was a very large black population. The railroads were being built and they was coming straight through here. Of course, the black community was there, ready for their children to be educated.
So with 5 little girls, $1.50 that she raised from selling sweet potato pies and boiled eggs, she was able to create her first school. I can imagine the cardboard boxes, the ink that was made from berries, that people probably looked at her and shook their heads.
James Gamble, of Procter & Gamble, she asked him to be on the board of trustees, and he said, a board of trustees of what? And she says, it's a dream. It's in my head, it's a dream, and it will happen. There will be school here.
She's very, very good at reaching out to those who are philanthropically inclined. She's always aware of not pushing too hard or going too far and creating backlash.
Some of the white women that she had on her whiteboard of women said, well, we think 8th grade is enough for Negroes. She said no. She wanted to add more.
Bethune's Daytona Literary and Industrial Training School for Negro Girls opened in 1904 as an elementary school. It evolved into a 2-year college shortly after absorbing Jacksonville, Florida's Cookman Institute in 1923.
Cookman Institute is considered one of the first secondary educational institutions founded in the state of Florida. They were running into some difficulty by the 1920s. Enrollment was down. Mary McLeod Bethune School was doing much better than Cookman Institute at the time, and so they closed Cookman Institute and moved it down to Daytona.
But in her calm and easy way, she made the people in Daytona and in this area understand that Bethune-Cookman was something special.
When I was a little girl going to school, to an elementary school on the campus of Bethune-Cookman, Mary McLeod Bethune would pass by our playground on the way to the dining hall. And now and then she would stop and say, "Come to me, my little black children." She was using black is beautiful before it became popular.
When she walked into that auditorium, if we didn't see her, she made sure that we heard her, because she said, "Stand up, you little black boys and girls." She was trying to instill in us that black was not dirty. It was okay to be black. She said, if everybody else is white and they're proud of it, you can be black and you can be proud of it.
One of the girls at her school developed appendicitis, and she rushed her to the hospital that existed. It was White Hospital. They sent her around the back door, and they put her on a gurney, and the girl was writhing in pain. And Mary said that I just could not understand why they would do this to her.
So what does she do? She opens an infirmary at the school, on the campus. She brings the nurses and the doctors to the students.
And so by 1911, we had the beginning of a hospital where she had doctors and nurses and outpatient care.
The faith of Mary McLeod Bethune was very important in connecting her to the various levels of African-American community. Most African-Americans, they are very spiritual people, and it's why a lot of parents decide to send their kids to school, because they recognize her and the role religion played in her life, and they recognize, I'm sending my kid to a school that is built on those principles.
One of the things that she tried to instill in us when she was telling us about our choices in life, to always put God first and ask for his guidance, along with working hard. You know, work as if everything depended on you, and pray as if everything depended on God.
Importance that Mary McLeod Bethune placed on interracial cooperation is oftentimes not stressed enough.
They had what was aptly called a community meeting at the college on Sunday afternoons. And this was where the community at large was invited to come into the college.
Anyone in the community could come in and hear the kids recite poems, the special group of the choir sing Negro spirituals. This is where she invited John D. Rockefeller and the White Sewing Machine Company.
She would tell her board of trustees very clearly, again, when they came to campus, look, you have to sit with the Negro citizenry here. I'm not going to put you on a separate platform.
And John D. Rockefeller might be sitting right next to his gardener.
Students were dressed in their blue and white. They would enter in procession and sit together. Usually would be a speaker. It was the only place in Daytona Beach where interracial groups could meet freely, was on the campus of Bethune-Cookman University. Mary McLeod Bethune did that.
She also taught her students black spirituals. And I think teaching a respect for black history through the gospel, through what used to be known as the Negro slave songs and Negro spirituals, was a way that she promoted this understanding of black people as equal citizens.
The students at the college were so impressive. When you would see them move about the community, you would know them by their dress.
And we had to wear our uniforms when we went to local churches or go to shop on Beach Street. You had to walk. You couldn't get in a car. It was for our safety. And we were told that, remember that you're Bethune-Cookman College students and always conduct yourself in a way that would make the school proud.
There's a situation where you have your place, but you love your place. Now, black people's place in Daytona was on 2nd Avenue. There were 41 stores on 2nd Avenue. You could buy anything that you wanted. There was a Piggly Wiggly in there. There was a A&P in there. There were stores in there that had fashions right from New York City. We were shielded from the harshness of segregation because Ms. Bethune's influence in the city of Daytona Beach was of such a nature that you could kind of feel free about moving around in the city, where some of these other places, Alabama and other, there was a different mindset.
In 1864, when they came up with the idea that every state should have 2 statues in the state collection, it was a wonderful idea. But by 2000, there were states that were saying, we want to rethink this.
The creation of the Mary McLeod Bethune Statuary Project really started in 2016 with the Florida legislature approving the replacement of the statue of Edmund Kirby Smith. Each state had 2 statues. The first statue that we had was Dr. John Gorey, who was the early inventor of the technology for air conditioning. But we also had a statue of General Edmund Kirby Smith, whose only real connection to Florida was that he was born in St. Augustine and eventually served in the Confederate forces in the Trans-Mississippi Department of the Confederacy. In 2016, the legislature decided to replace that statue.
After a process of deliberation and contemplation and community input on who should be the person representing the state of Florida, it was decided on March 19th that it should be Dr. Bethune. It's hugely significant that the state of Florida has said, who is our greatest Floridian? Went through a process of reflecting on that, had input from communities all across the state of Florida, and then chose Dr. Bethune.
The selection process of the sculptor was as important as the selection of the great Floridian that would be represented. You had to have somebody of immense talent and skill to put that sculpture in Washington, D.C.
And so out of the artists that had applied to create the statue, the one chosen was Nilda Comos. And Nilda said the most beautiful words to me. I have worked my entire life for this moment. I have been training my entire life for this sculpture.
In 2018, when Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune was chosen as one of 2 Floridians to represent Florida in the U.S. Capitol Statuary Hall State Collection, the Statuary Fund Board quickly formed to bring the project to fruition. It was first assembled under the auspices of Bethune-Cookman University, and in late 2018, the school's Board of Trustees voted unanimously to form a separate nonprofit organization to facilitate the fundraising and logistics of the statuary project. Once the nonprofit formed, its board partnered with the Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce. Later, the Statuary Fund Board decided to form its own 501c3 corporation, completed a thorough financial audit, and expanded its mission to include a Daytona Beach bronze statue, a feature-length documentary, and a K-12 curriculum. Bethune and most other Black leaders strongly supported America's entry into World War I in April 1917, believing that full citizenship could be earned through home front patriotism and sacrifice on the battlefield.
Her argument is this: Black people have fought in every war in this nation's history. We're going to fight in one more war, but at the end of this war, we're going to enjoy equal citizenship. Working through the Federation of Colored Women's Clubs and local Black organizations, she raised tens of thousands of dollars for the U.S. war effort. But Mrs. Bethune said, look, it's important for us to give to the Allied war effort because we want to remind America what we have sacrificed for this country.
Often called the New Negro, the post-war generation of Blacks demanded respect and an end to segregation and discrimination. But their demands for racial equality ignited a white backlash, spearheaded by the Ku Klux Klan.
The Ku Klux Klan had come to her campus. And they had made it clear as they moved across Bethune-Cookman that what she was doing in encouraging African American people to vote had to stop. They would have no more of it. And so when she arrived on campus, she gathered the teachers. It was near nightfall. And she said, tonight is a good night for the choir to practice. I can only explain Dr. Bethune's willingness to put herself in danger. And that wasn't the only time. By saying she was a woman of deep, 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 deep faith. She believed in a God who she said would protect her. And it was that faith that allowed her to do so much of what she did, including putting her own life in danger in the interest of her people.
Mary McLeod Bethune's focus on uplifting African Americans led her to embrace the Black Women's Club movement in 1912. Banned from white organizations, Black men and women formed their own church groups, mutual aid societies, and fraternal organizations.
Her dogged determination to change things for the better for African Americans led her early on in the 20th century to begin to get involved with different, particularly Black women's organizations.
The National Association of Colored Women, which was established in the 1890s. And Bethune became aware of this organization in 1912. And by 1924, she was president.
Mary McLeod Bethune was the president of the Florida State Teachers Association in 1919. But then in the mid-1920s, she was the president of the National Association of Teachers in Colored Schools. Black teachers are, the largest number of Black professionals that we have during this time period. Her position as a leader in the organization of Black teachers positions her in a very important way to be able to help influence and help with that political organizing.
Mary served 2 terms as president of the National Association of Colored Women. There were smaller organizations that came together to make one statement, but usually only annually. Mary saw a need for a more cohesive kind of clearinghouse for women's political and economic power. That was a motivation for her founding in 1935 the National Council of Negro Women.
During the late 1920s and early 1930s, Bethune advised Republican Presidents Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover on child welfare, but they were uninterested in addressing Black concerns. Everything changed when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president in 1932. Roosevelt's promise of a New Deal for Depression-ravaged America inspired Bethune. She became a New Deal Democrat and cultivated a close friendship with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt.
Roosevelt was offering African Americans a part of this New Deal. He's going to emancipate us from wage slavery and poverty and give us opportunity in American society.
What we see is an almost revolutionary change in the way that those African Americans who could vote in the 30s, in fact did vote in the 30s, moving from the party of Lincoln, the Republican Party, to now the party of Roosevelt and the Democratic Party.
When Marian Anderson is denied the right to sing in Constitution Hall because she is a Negro, Eleanor Roosevelt arranges for the concert to be held in front of the Lincoln Memorial. For the remainder of her life, she will continue to be an outspoken champion in the cause of equal civil rights for all people.
Dr. Bethune was a mentor of the First Lady of the United States of America. Eleanor Roosevelt had very progressive views, but she didn't have experiences with African American people.
Eleanor Roosevelt, she recognized Mary Bethune as a kindred soul, as someone who thought as she did about many of the problems that the United States faced in the 1930s.
The story goes that when Dr. Bethune wanted to speak with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, she would just pick up the phone and say, "Eleanor, I understand the president wishes to speak with me." And Eleanor Roosevelt would find her husband and say, "Franklin, I think you wish to speak with Mary." That relationship between those two women, a friendship, a comradeship between a black and a white woman, opened the doors that allowed Mary McLeod Bethune to know President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Recommended by Eleanor Roosevelt, Bethune was appointed director of the Minority Affairs Division of the National Youth Administration in 1936, making her the highest-ranking black federal employee. She headed the Black Cabinet, an elite group of black federal administrators who advised the president. In 1935, Bethune was awarded the NAACP's Spingarn Medal, Black America's highest honor.
With the Black Cabinet, because there you had some of the best known African American intellectuals, and yet the person who had the most power was Mary McLeod Bethune.
She spoke from her heart to their hearts, and they felt her magnetism. They perceived she was not in it for herself. She was in it for the good of all concerned. And because she was willing to give so much, she inspired other people to give a great deal than they would have otherwise.
In the 1936 election, most black Americans voted for FDR. The country, however, remained segregated, and often New Deal programs, which were administered locally, ensured blacks saw fewer benefits than whites. Prior to World War II, only a small minority of progressives supported civil rights.
Bethune tolerated segregation during the New Deal because had she frontally tried to assault that policy in certain areas of the country, nothing would have been accomplished. She accomplished what she could within the system and pushed the system further out so she could accomplish more.
I have been an artist ever since I remember. I always had projects in school. I always was working and drawing. In college, I actually studied painting, but I was always interested in three-dimensional, but I didn't have the right teachers, so I started teaching myself. And not until I went to Pietrasanta, and I was so fascinated with learning how to carve marble, which is really the reason that I went. And that was a very important part of my artist life, to get to Italy. I started as an apprentice, and that meant I didn't get paid. But what helped the most was working with the artisans. They have a tradition of hundreds of years that they have learned from each other and each other and each other, and I was able to get that, which is very, very special. The relationship between the artisans and the artists is very important because they're like your hands. They know how you like to work. I was very lucky to be able to learn from them and to watch the master sculptors at work.
Pietrasanta ha un legame molto forte storico con la scultura in marmo internazionale, perché la sua vicinanza geografica alle Alpi Apuane la presenza del marmo sulle Alpi Apuane ha fatto sì che nel corso dei secoli a valle, nei paesi della valle, si formassero intere generazioni di scalpellini, scultori, artigiani del marmo, che di generazione in generazione si sono trasmessi questo mestiere, questa capacità grandissima di conoscere e lavorare questo materiale. Che mi piace del lavoro di Nilda Comas è la sua capacità di esprimere attraverso le forme delle sue sculture i sentimenti. Le forme delle sue sculture narrano delle storie, basta guardarle per domandarsi questi personaggi cosa ci vogliono raccontare, quale storia sta dietro quei volti, quelle forme.
I decided to do the sculpture for the National Statuary Hall in marble because that has always been the biggest honor that you can give someone through history. Maybe the most important reason is that I had visited the National Statuary Hall and the marble sculpture stood out.
Statuary marble is the finest marble that you can create a statue in. It is why Michelangelo decided to create his statue of David in statuary marble. It is why that cave has been so popular over the years. It started 503 years ago with Michelangelo and has now seen Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune carved from that same marble.
I didn't know about Dr. Bethune before I entered the competition. The more that I got to know about her, the more I liked her and the more I admire her and fell in love with her personality. It was hard to imagine that 17 children plus the parents lived in this 2-room cabin, and plus the fact that with such beginnings, she's going to end up in the Capitol. And with all of the achievements that she did during that time, that was very difficult, being a woman and then being African American. The whole reason of this sculpture is to show how important she became, her whole struggle and how the things that she wanted became possible. And then on the other hand, I want them to see a sculpture done in the traditional classical way, which could be one of the last ones, because these methods are disappearing and dying with the artisans. The robots are taking over. And I think that it goes hand in hand with the meaning of the sculpture. When I started thinking, how am I going to portray her? I chose education because education is what took her to her whole life. It started with education. And I remember there was no other sculpture at the National Statuary Hall that had a cap and gown. She always wore her gown open. I thought, wow, that's a perfect opportunity for me to portray her with the cap open like she wore it. So I chose a blouse that was feminine and it showed also her other self, and a skirt. And then she's wearing shoes just like the ones that I researched that she wore in the photographs around that time. And she's leaning on the cane, but not because she needed to lean, but because of that relationship that was so strong that she leaned on President Roosevelt. And the rose makes it more feminine, and they're also delicate. I will carve it out of black marble.
She was in Switzerland and she saw this beautiful garden of flowers,
And there was one very dark flower among all the flowers, and they were roses. And so she called it Black Rose, although typically there's a very dark red rose that looks black. And she came back from Europe calling her students Black Roses.
Nilda Como started with a 2-foot clay maquette. Then she grew it to a 4-foot clay maquette. Then she grew it to an 8-foot clay maquette. From that clay maquette comes a plaster model. From that plaster model and clay maquette comes a number of statues.
This the work in marble is very compact, but it's softer to carve. And also, because it's so compact, you can get all the little details. If you have another kind of marble, I explain it to my students sort of like, it's like sugar, you know, where you see the sugar get hard, but then you touch it and it just breaks. And that's what happens with marble. When you go in with the tools, it can break and you don't get the detail.
Nilda's challenges were across the board. The country of Italy was stricken by the pandemic long before the United States. All of Nilda's work had to stop temporarily. So it was difficult for her. And it was difficult for all of us, but she like Dr. Bethune, persevered, right? She is a resilient soul.
When the U.S. entered World War II in 1941, Mary McLeod Bethune demanded that blacks play a meaningful role in national policy discussions and receive their fair share of wartime jobs. She reminded America that blacks had earned the right to equal citizenship by fighting and dying for the United States. America could not honestly claim to be the world's arsenal of freedom and democracy while denying basic freedoms to its black citizens.
Mary McLeod Bethune is a blaze of activity during the war. Her new passionate cause is making sure, this is a war for democracy. The black press creates what's called the Double V campaign. Victory against totalitarianism and fascism and Nazism abroad, but also victory against racism at home.
She is instrumental in arranging a meeting between the president and A. Philip Randolph of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters Union and other black leaders. And that becomes a vehicle for black laborers in the South to get decent jobs in northern factories and to use that leverage to dramatically improve economic opportunities.
When German U-boats began prowling the east coast of Florida, the city fathers and mothers of Daytona Beach realized we are paralyzed. We are a tourist town now with no tourists. You can't buy gas to come here. You can't get rations to come here. We are going to blow away like a tumbleweed. A very prominent socialite approaches Mary McLeod Bethune at the college and asks, could you help? Not only does she agree to help, she picks up the telephone and calls President Franklin D. Roosevelt. A few weeks later, a WAC base is coming to Daytona Beach. That wasn't a coincidence. The WAC was a military unit for women, and the WAC's coming here. This didn't happen because we feel sorry for Daytona Beach. It's political. That's how you get military bases.
Bethune used her influence to assist Daytona Beach and Bethune-Cookman College. She focused on improving the lives of her students and the city's black residents.
The fact that she and Eleanor Roosevelt were friends enabled us to get the NYA, the National Youth Administration Program here.
She did bring projects to Bethune-Cookman College. She had a special fund, which over several years amounted to more than $600,000 that she administered through her agency. At Bethune-Cookman, there was a chef training course initiated through these funds, and there was automobile mechanics and radio and tailoring and other things, vocational things that young people were trained to do.
Bethune's local efforts even had implications for national politics, policies, and pastimes.
Robinson is the first of his race to be honored with admission to the shrine of the national game. His sure fielding helped carry Brooklyn to 6 World Series with the Yankees. A murderous hitter, Jackie won the National League batting crown in 1949.
Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball in the spring of 1947. But the integration of modern professional baseball occurred on March 17, 1946, when Robinson played for the Brooklyn Dodgers minor league team, the Montreal Royals, at what is now Jackie Robinson Ballpark in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Of course, she embraced Jackie Robinson and those guys when they first came in 1946 with all of her heart. And she opened the city, the black part of the city, up to them, to the Negro players.
Baseball was lily white in 1945. General manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers was a remarkable figure named Branch Rickey. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the Brooklyn Dodgers were training in Daytona Beach at this time.
She offered her offices. Rickey thought that, yeah, if this woman, she had something to do with it, he would be safe. She kind of would, look out for him, and it came together very well.
Mary McLeod Bethune and businessman George W. Ingram Sr. founded Bethune-Volusia Incorporated in 1949. They purchased a strip of shoreline and named it Bethune Beach. Located about 20 miles south of Daytona Beach, Bethune Beach became a bathing area for blacks and a training ground for black business activity.
And so she had the same idea, that if you're going to segregate us, then we'll just buy and have our own and do our own thing. And so that was the motivation for her to go into partnership with other black businessmen in Daytona to buy that property.
The idea was that it would be a beach that people could come to, but it would also be a place that people could invest in.
And it was successful for a large extent because they built a motel down there. People from all over Jacksonville, Orlando, and places like that used to come down there to go to the beach because that was the only place that they could go to.
The beach would be packed. We had lifeguards. We had everything that you would see practically, in Daytona Beach, with the exception of a real boardwalk.
She needs no introduction. The ever-present autograph seeker, and Mary McLeod Bethune is gracious.
Eleanor Roosevelt, a delegate to the initial United Nations conference held in October 1945 in San Francisco, made Bethune a consultant, the only African-American woman present at the conference. Age and infirmity had not dimmed Bethune's struggle against oppression, as she urged the gathering to end colonialism and international racism. Bethune lobbied for an international Bill of Rights and advised that the United Nations prioritize education and culture.
We need to restore Mary McLeod Bethune into that pantheon of black thinkers also who thought globally. If we dig deep enough, I think we'll find that she has this conception of international politics much earlier in her career, but that it only becomes later when she has a larger platform that she's allowed to really speak about that.
I teach a course called Black Women in America. And I have a lecture specifically on Mary McLeod Bethune, but I end that course every year with her last will and testament. My students find that last will and testament, I think, inspirational.
And it transcends race, but it also lifts up generations of African American people because we remember what it was like not to have self-pride, not to have dignity and respect, and to be relegated to the back doors.
When you look at Dr. Bethune's writings from many years ago, that which she talked about then was truly prophetic. Dr. Bethune spoke about those then because she knew that those things were going to be occurring today.
There's one part of that last will and testament that I think about a lot. I leave you the ability to work harmoniously together. Now, I think that's a very important word, harmoniously. Not unanimously, but harmoniously. Dr. Bethune understood that we are different, our backgrounds are different, and therefore we would see things differently. But you can harmonize. Those differences ought to be harmonized. I think that's a very critical word.
Her last will and testament, it's written in poetic form. And all of the great themes in her life kind of come together. The rights of women, the importance of respecting Black womanhood, her dreams of transforming the society. She's not satisfied with the state of this nation.
Nearly 50 people traveled to Italy from the United States for the blessing of Nilde Come's statue. During their stay, they toured the Cervietti studio, the Michelangelo cave, a marble quarry, and then presented an elaborate program on the life and legacy of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune to the Pietrasanta community. Their trip also included a visit to the Versiliana Park to see the bronze statue, which was on display in Pietrasanta before it, too, would be shipped to the U.S. for permanent installation in Daytona Beach, Florida. In a ceremony with participants from the Bethune Statuary Fund, Bethune-Cookman University, and American and Italian officials, the statue was unveiled and blessed in the Center City Piazza in front of City Hall. Nilde Come's statue of Mary McLeod Bethune is 11 feet tall and weighs 3,637 pounds. The pedestal weighs 2,425 pounds, for a total weight of more than 3 tons. Following the Pietrasanta events, the statue was transported by boat to Savannah, Georgia, in preparation for its tour in the U.S. prior to its installation in the U.S. Capitol. The first stop for the statue was the News Journal Center in Daytona Beach, Florida, also the home of Bethune-Cookman University. Installation of the Bethune statue in any location is a complex process involving both heavy-duty equipment and delicate handling. The statue was unveiled on October 11th, 2021, and over the next 3 months, nearly 15,000 people came to see the monumental artwork.
The accomplishment that most impressed me is the fact that she started the school in 1904, and women didn't even have the right to vote till 1920. I think that's really huge, because for a black woman to start a school before women even had the right to vote is a huge thing.
My reaction the first time I saw the statue was that it was beautiful, and after knowing about her story and how the story tied into the different aspects in the statue, I think it's a beautiful representation of her.
It's breathtaking. It's beautifully done, and it's very detailed, and it's amazing.
It radiates. She was definitely a light in the world, and still just in the statue, you can still see it.
I told my friend if I felt like she was looking at me. You know, you can't just help but just stare at it, and I honestly felt as if it was kind of looking into my soul. Like, it kind of made me want to think about, you know, what are the things that I want to accomplish in my life? What do I still have to do? Like, it just motivated me to want to do more with myself.
When I first saw Dr. Bethune's statue, my heart melted. I'm gonna cry. Okay. She was looking down on me. I was just hoping that I made her proud. I saw her as my ancestor. I saw her as another woman that is paving the way for me to be here. And she did. Her story is my story.
Having the statue of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune in the Capitol means that the United States of America has taken one giant step. It's almost like the game, and someone asked, "Mother, may I?" And America said, "Yes, you may."
After leaving Daytona Beach in December 2021, the Bethune statue made a brief visit to Mayesville, a small town in the heart of South Carolina's Cotton Belt, close to the plantation where Mary McLeod was born and raised.
Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Mark, you got that a second? Yes, sir.
Those that are standing, let's
set this world on fire. God's gonna set this world on fire one of these days. Hallelujah. God's gonna set this world on fire. God's gonna set this world on fire one of these days.
Following the Mayesville ceremony, the statue was once again carefully packed in preparation for its journey to Washington.
One of the most important things that are going to be happening soon is that they're going to be putting her statue up in the Capitol.
It's a living, breathing example of the push for women's rights, the push for equality.
Having the Bethune statue in the U.S. Capitol means a great deal to democracy and justice in America. I think that it shows that America is opening up its mind. It shows that the people are growing and we're headed in the right direction.
She stood for all people. She wanted all people to live a fair and decent life, for all people to, have a decent education.
Democracy is an experiment. It is a march towards something greater.
It says a great deal about America that we have arrived at a space where we would take a woman of such meager beginnings and recognize her extraordinary life.
It means equality. It means unity. It means peace. When we see it in, Statuary Hall, it's going to be just a breath of fresh air.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
As Speaker of the House, it is my privilege to welcome you to Statuary Hall as we celebrate a pioneering and patriotic American, the pride of Florida and America, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. Now it is my special honor to invite our program participants to join in the unveiling of this magnificent statue. Usually we save this to the end, but we wanted you all to be able to enjoy it throughout the program, so we're going to begin.
Let us pray. We praise you for the laudable life of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, and for this statue dedication service in her honor.
Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune began her lifelong career in Daytona Beach, Florida as a champion for education with the full realization that educational advancement equals social and economic development and advancement. She adeptly advised worldwide leaders on gender equality. She counseled U.S. presidents on equal employment opportunities, and she championed in our community bridge building for making world change. Her worldwide views provided her a unique vision where humanity can breathe freely and live full lives harnessing their strengths. Our board of directors, I must recognize by name quickly because they did so much and represent the fabric of America. Men, women, Democrats, Republicans, Black, brown, and white Americans. Officers Bob Lloyd, Mary Greenlees, board members Jennifer Adams, Jim Cameron, Michelle Carter, Nilda Comas, Kathy Crotty, Joyce Cusack, Danielle Garrett, Daytona Beach Mayor Derek Henry, Sherry Lloyd, Nellie Lapoli, Sherry Paramore, Dr. Hiram Powell, and Volusia County Commissioner Billy Wheeler.
On behalf of everyone at Bethune-Cookman University, our hearts are rejoicing today, seeing our founder and namesake take her rightful place among the most distinguished Americans here in the center of our democracy. No one could have predicted that this daughter of slaves would create a university, found a powerful political organization, advise presidents, and inspire generations.
Dr. Bethune was determined to create opportunities for every child regardless of the color of their skin, and wanted to make sure that every child received one of life's most precious gifts, and that's an education. And when we look at this life so well lived, it is only befitting that Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune take her rightful place in the people's house and continue to let her light shine as she represents the great state of Florida.
I'm so proud of the Florida legislature, of then Governor Rick Scott, who signed the legislation to make this happen, Governor DeSantis, who sent the request to allow us all to be here today. She saw that the workers, the black workers that were building the railroad, the Flagler Railroad that allowed Florida to one day be developed, weren't getting an education. She saw a need and she addressed it.
Countless slaves tunneled to freedom because one woman led the way. The civil rights movement began because one woman refused to move. Poor children in Florida were educated because one woman would not give up. Harriet Tubman, one woman. Rosa Parks, one woman. Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, one woman. Each launched a movement. Each forever changed the way we see our world.
Dr. Bethune knew that in a great cause of liberty, there can be no excuses. Growth never arises out of playing the blame game. To her, the question was never who to blame, but rather how to grow. Bethune's statue stands today as a monument to her incredible legacy.
Hear the words of Mary McLeod Bethune's last will and testament. As my life draws to a close, here then is my legacy. I leave you love. I leave you hope. I leave you the challenge of developing confidence in one another. I leave you a thirst for education. I leave you a respect for the use of power. I leave you faith. I leave you racial dignity. I leave you a desire to live harmoniously with your fellow men. I leave you, finally, a responsibility to our young people.
Dr. Bethune wasn't just a great Floridian. She was a great American. We unveiled a statue of an American whose life exemplified our nation's long, historic, and ongoing 246-year journey to live up fully to the promise of our founding.
Dr. Bethune epitomizes the values we hold dear: industriousness, thirst for education, desire to build peace among people. She devoted her life to equal rights and service, yes, to presidents, but to students, women, her race, veterans, and everyday Americans. Madam Speaker, this is Florida's intention today and for all time, that the life and legacy of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune be a symbol of justice, hope, and love for America and all humankind.
Towards the very end of her life, she became involved with Moral Rearmament, which was a secular organization, well-financed, that tried to bring people from around the world together. And as a result of that association, she examined her life more thoroughly.
Just 50 years ago, with $1.50, faith in God, and a desire to serve, we planted Bethune-Cookman College. There were no schools comparable for the training of my people in that particular section of the country. Because of what God has done for me, I felt called by Him to go out and make a path that they could follow. I think now of my imperfections. I think of the 4 standards that we have as our guide here: honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. I cannot help express from my heart the feeling of how short I have been from the perfection of these standards in my own life. I think first of my son, my only child, how I had to leave him in the care of others, while I tramped all over America looking for nickels, dimes, quarters, that I might build an institution that not only my son, but thousands of others might come. I had to neglect him. I could not give him the care, the guidance that a tender mother needed to give a child. He often looked in my face and said, "Mother, the school comes first, and I come last." Now, as I recognize all the defects in his life, and as I have studied myself, I have analyzed these 4 standards that we measure our lives by. And I feel that my first apology is to my son, Albert, who is waiting my return.
One of the final duties of the Statuary Fund organization was to install an original bronze statue of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune in Daytona Beach. The site chosen for the permanent installation was the Riverfront Esplanade, a premier gathering space and botanical garden which spans a mile of intercoastal waterway. The statue will stand within the Bethune Pavilion, and the gaze of Bethune looks down the street named for her, toward her namesake school, Bethune-Cookman University.
I'm singing way over in Beulah, yes, way over in Beulah, Beulah. We're gonna have a good time way over in Beulah land. Oh, we're gonna drink on the holy water way over in Beulah land. Oh, we're gonna drink on the holy water way over in Beulah land. Singing way over in Beulah, way over in Beulah. We're gonna have a good time way over in. When we get to heaven chillin', we're gonna have a good time way over in. When we get to heaven chillin', way over in Beulah land. Oh yes.
I would place her as a kind of a bridge figure between Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, and then on the other bookend, John Lewis, Diane Nash, Martin Luther King. But in between, I would place Mary McLeod Bethune, A. Philip Randolph, W.B. Du Bois. These are the trailblazers, but they're also the institution builders. Without the historically black college and university, without Bethune-Cookman, without Florida A&M, without Tuskegee, there would have been no modern civil rights movement.
Her DNA rubbed off on me greatly. Dr. Bethune, she was not only an educator, she was a civil rights leader. She showed up, she marched, she rallied, she prayed.
Her idea of not just building women who can read and write, but women who are ready to change the world. I think that's part of what we're doing today. This whole notion of black girl power, I think that Mary McLeod Bethune would be very comfortable with that.
She has a quote that said, "When I step in the room, they know the Negro is here." So she saw herself as the embodiment of black pride, black honor, and black opportunity.
She was a loyal American patriot who wanted this country to be as good as it could possibly be. And to her, that meant opening its arms to all of its citizens and drawing upon all of its citizens for what they could do to make us great, to make us stronger, to make us more united.
I'm 91 years old, and I still have the Mary McLeod spirit in me right now. Just to hear her talk and the way she carried herself. And she's a great lady.
Democracy is for me and for 12 million black Americans a goal toward which our nation is marching. The democratic doors of equal opportunity have not been opened wide to Negroes. The great masses of Negro workers are depressed and unprotected in the lowest levels of agriculture and domestic service. Their housing and living conditions are sordid and unhealthful. They live too often in terror of the lynch mob, are deprived too often of the constitutional right of suffrage, and are humiliated by the denial of civil liberties. Perhaps the greatest battle is before us, the fight for a new America in which 12 million Negroes, shoulder to shoulder with their fellow Americans, will strive that this nation under God will have a new birth of freedom. This dream, this ideal, this aspiration, this is what American democracy means to me.